When you vote at the referendum, you're being asked a single yes or no question. Do you think that we, as a country, should amend the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice? Yes or no? So what is the Voice? Essentially, it's an advisory body that will provide advice to government on issues that affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So the referendum, in a nutshell, is just about asking whether or not you think that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders should be recognised in the Constitution and have a clear avenue through which to provide advice to government. It's nothing more, nothing less, just yes or no. You may have heard people claim the Voice would be permanent and couldn't be changed. The fact is, there's really not much truth to this one. Enshrining the concept of the Voice in the Constitution is as permanent as anything else in the Constitution, in that you'd need another referendum to remove it. But the constitutional amendment itself only creates the Voice. It does not define how it will function or what it can do. None of that stuff belongs in the Constitution. The Constitution will just create a body called the Voice, an advisory group, with the only constitutional requirement being that it's called the Voice. But you don't have to believe some random guy on the internet. Here's Robert French, KC, former Chief Justice of Australia, the highest ranking judicial officer in the country, to explain it to you.
The Voice is a body, and the ordinary meaning of that word in this context is a group of people who work together. The only constitutional requirement is that it be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice.
While the constitutional amendment would create a body called the Voice, it's up to the Australian Parliament to legislate it, or in other words, define the rules in which the Voice will operate. Again, you don't need to listen to a random guy on the internet. Here's Robert French explaining it.
Section 129(3), which tells us that the composition, functions, powers and procedures of the Voice will be up to the Parliament to determine, using the authority conferred upon it by that provision.
Just in case that's not enough, here's Noel Pearson explaining the same concept to Dan Tehan, member of the opposition and a no supporter.
This is what the provision says.
Yeah.
The Parliament shall have the power to make laws. The Parliament shall have the power to make laws. The legislation is your responsibility as a parliamentarian and Mullenderry's responsibility as a parliamentarian to create the legislation after the referendum is secured. You've got the power to legislate here. Dan, I think you misunderstand the difference between the constitutional provision and the laws that are generated pursuant to it. You've got to separate the two things out. The constitutional provision can't be abolished. No. But the legislation can be chopped and changed for decades and decades to come.
So let me clarify before we go to our next question. If there was a change of government and Dan Tehan, the Liberal Party, wanted a different kind of voice, you could do that, right?
Completely. Completely.
Do you agree, Dan?
Well, you could, but it doesn't you could change the legislation.
You just couldn't get rid of it.
No, you can't get rid of it.
But honestly, because I'm a stickler for facts, sorry, and I know this area well. You couldn't get rid of it, but you could change it.
That's correct.
The Constitution creates it and then the Parliament legislates it.
Yes, yes.
That's correct.
Ultimately, Dan Tehan acknowledges that, yes, it is indeed the Parliament's responsibility to legislate the Voice, and therefore it is the Parliament that has the power to change the Voice how, if and when it sees fit.
There has been a lot of talk about, well, where's the detail? Of course, we know it's a constitutional provision and one doesn't ordinarily find granular detail in a constitutional provision. So the ultimate form and functions will be in the hands of the elected Parliament. If the people say yes, then it will be up to everybody on both sides of the debate to contribute to making Australia's decision work for the benefit of all Australians.
You may have heard people claim that the Voice is legally risky.
Untested and risk-ridden Canberra Voice model.
The risks that this referendum, that the Voice to Parliament poses.
Anyone making this claim is choosing to ignore the overwhelming majority of legal opinion, including the advice of the Solicitor General. The formal advice from the Solicitor General was clear and unambiguous. The Solicitor General said that the proposed constitutional amendment would not pose any threat to Australia's system of representative and responsible government. The Voice's function of making representations will not fetter or impede the exercise of the existing powers of the Parliament. The constitutional amendment would not prevent the Parliament from legislating until it received a representation from the Voice. It was the Solicitor General's legal opinion that the proposed constitutional amendment was not just compatible with the system of representative and responsible government prescribed by the Constitution, but an enhancement of that system. If you need more, in the past couple of days, 71 constitutional and law teachers have signed an open letter about the Voice to Parliament, not to advocate for one side or the other, but to clarify some of the issues that seem to be causing confusion about the proposed constitutional change, to help Australians sift through what they are reading and hearing, and to assist them in making an informed choice at the upcoming referendum. In the open letter, they conclude that the vast majority of expert legal opinion agrees that this amendment is not constitutionally risky. Sure, you'll be able to find a legal person here or there pushing the no case. You just need to understand that they are by far in the minority. Like Louise here. Louise has written a few articles and appeared on radio and TV quite a bit, and she's clearly got some strong opinions. Oh, sorry, did I forget to mention, Louise is married to Angus Taylor, who you may remember as the Liberal Party politician prone to finding himself in hot water, and earlier this year being singled out as one of the opposition MPs accused of misquoting former High Court judges on The Voice.
Great move. Well done, Angus.
Here's a fun fact, Louise actually ran Angus Taylor's election campaign. To be fair though, publications like the Financial Review also seem to have forgotten to mention that Louise is married to Angus Taylor. Wonder why? Given that the functions of The Voice can be changed via the very normal, very transparent and very boring legislative process we have in this country, I'm just not sure how anyone could argue that this is a risky proposition. You might have heard people claim that the Indigenous population don't want The Voice.
They're not in favour of The Voice.
Anyone making this claim is either relying on anecdotal evidence or making it up, because the fact of the matter is that whilst there are only a couple of publicly available polls on Indigenous support for The Voice, the results of both suggest high levels of support. The first poll was done by Ipsos in January 2023. Of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders surveyed, approximately 80% of respondents said that they would vote yes at the referendum, with around 10% answering no, and roughly 10% undecided. In March 2023, a YouGov poll showed that of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders surveyed, 83% of respondents said that they would either vote yes or were leaning towards doing so, while 14% said they would vote no or were leaning that way, and 4% were undecided. I think that at this stage it's fairly safe to say that there's no polling that exists to support the claim that Indigenous people don't want The Voice. If there had been any polling done by a reputable company that supported that claim, you can guarantee that it would have been slapped all over the front page of newspapers and led on the nightly news. So why hasn't there been more polling of Indigenous communities? I'd suggest the reason for it's far more boring and straightforward than what people might like to think. To poll a full, representative sample of the Indigenous population is no easy task, especially given factors such as the geographic locations you need to travel to in order to get that representative sample. The time and money needed to do it properly and with any regularity may well have just taken that option off the table. Putting polling to one side, the desire for The Voice is clearly spelt out in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. It's clear there that The Voice is what the Indigenous community have asked for. You may have heard people claim that The Voice is something dreamt up by Anthony Albanese in Canberra.
The Prime Minister's Canberra Voice. The Prime Minister's divisive Canberra Voice.
There's really no way to sugarcoat this, but that's simply not true. The request for The Voice came from the First Nations Constitutional Convention at Uluru in 2017. This was the result of a national consultation process with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, which had been known as the Regional Dialogues. So it had nothing to do with Albo. Hell, he wasn't even opposition leader back then. This is not a Labor concept. It's not a coalition concept. It doesn't come from Canberra. The request for the First Nations voice comes directly from the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which was first issued on the 26th of May 2017. It's actually in the statement about 3/4 of the way down. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Simple. You might have heard people say that not all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders want The Voice. That's undoubtedly true, but based on available polling and all the work that went into the Uluru Statement from the heart, and then to get this referendum up, I'd say they're likely in the minority. At this point, it's important to acknowledge that there are actually two no camps. There's the no camp I refer to as the mainstream no. These are the politically motivated no's prosecuting the case in support of Peter Dutton and the coalition. These are the no's that have received the majority of the media attention and flooding the landscape with so much misinformation that videos like this one are necessary. These are the no's that are empowering the willfully ignorant, and much of the garbage commentary you'll find on social media, and probably in the comments of this video. But there is another no camp, who have become a bit lost in all the noise. These are the progressive no's, and they're largely led by the Black Sovereign movement. In a nutshell, the progressive no's do not believe the voice goes far enough, and want to see treaty first. The position taken by the progressive no's would likely petrify many of the mainstream no's if the truth's known. Ironically, you'll find some in the mainstream no camp pushing the no case because they don't want to see anything remotely approaching treaty, while the progressive no's are pushing a no case because they want treaty first. I find it hard to get my head around the fact that there will be people voting no because they don't want to see any form of treaty, and at the same time there'll be people voting no because they want to get to treaty faster. Here's Warren Mundine confusing all his mainstream no supporters by suggesting that voting no will mean the country arrives at treaty faster.
So your message is vote no and the treaties process will really begin.
Yeah.
So we're more likely to get treaties if people vote no.
Yeah, because then we have to do the hard, on the 15th of October, if it's a no vote, that's when the real work starts.
Whether or not the voice gets up, many states are individually ploughing ahead with treaty regardless. Interestingly, and it is worth mentioning, in recent weeks there have been reports of progressive no leaders switching to the yes camp, as they've started to see the risks to the community that a no vote might bring. You might have heard people say that the Uluru Statement is really 26 pages long and that there was an FOI and hidden documents and all sorts of stuff.
How many occasions has he said, it's a very simple document, fits on around, I don't know, one A4 page? Well, guess what, Peter? That's the Uluru Statement from the heart. It doesn't fit on one A4 page.
First, this is just not true. The Uluru Statement is a single A4 page. It's not 26 pages. There was an FOI request and a whole bunch of information released under that, but all these additional pages that are being waved around, they're not the statement. This is all background information and things like meeting minutes. You can verify that fact yourself by freezing this Sky News clip. Record of meeting. They're clearly meeting minutes. The National Indigenous Australians Agency also sent a formal letter to the no camp explaining that the statement was indeed a single page.
That is the Uluru Statement from the heart.
Of course, you don't have to believe me, you can jump online and read the full FOI package on their website. There's nothing hidden there. The second thing to point out here is that you're not actually being asked to vote on the Uluru Statement. It doesn't appear in the referendum question or the proposed constitutional amendment in any way. You may have seen people claim that the voice is racist.
It is the very description of racism.
Let's start with looking at the definition of racist. Characterised by or showing prejudice, discrimination or antagonism against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalised. On definition alone, there's no way the voice could be considered racist. 3.8% of the total Australian population were Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders based on the last census. I'd suggest that if anyone is trying to argue that the remaining 96.2% of the population could be marginalised by this 3.8% of the population, then they're probably arguing from a position of bad faith. The voice is not racist. The voice is about trying to level the playing field and raise up 3.8% of our population. Again, you don't need to listen to a random guy on the internet. The Australian Human Rights Commission supports the establishment of the voice. The Australian Human Rights Commission's Race Discrimination Commissioner, Chin Tan, has said that creating an Indigenous voice to Parliament is not racist or inequitable. On the contrary, it presents an opportunity for Australia to address and overcome racism and discrimination. Furthermore, the Race Discrimination Commissioner has said that claims that a voice would create racial inequality are also disingenuous, because they are not made in order to support greater equality in Australia. Equality does not mean that everyone should be treated exactly the same. It has always been true that in order to be free and equal in dignity and rights, marginalised or disadvantaged groups sometimes require unique representation or assistance. This is particularly so with Indigenous peoples, which is why the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples bestows unique rights to the original inhabitants of countries that have been colonised. So there you have it, the Race Discrimination Commissioner for the Australian Human Rights Commission telling Australians quite clearly that the Voice is not racist. The reality is this referendum is a very simple one. You're being asked whether or not you want to see Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders recognised in our Constitution by giving them an advisory body to assist government with making better and more informed decisions on issues that affect the lives of Indigenous communities. An advisory body with no legislative powers, no right of veto. An advisory body, nothing to be scared of. The reality is the outcome of this referendum will have no significant impact on 96 to 97% of the country's population. But writing yes on that ballot paper may be enough to make a positive impact on the lives of 3 to 4% of our population and help move us one step forward as a country.
So in conclusion, folks,
what goes before the Australian people in this referendum is the simple idea of a national advisory body incorporated into the Constitution as an act of recognition of our First Peoples and thus of our own continental history and national identity.